Mike Tomlin would make a great head coach for the Chicago Bears, but not if it's going to cost multiple early draft picks to trade for him.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when you play your first $5 bet, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we look at Mike Tomlin as a head coaching trade candidate after the Pittsburgh Steelers were eliminated from the playoffs. Maybe some Steelers fans wondering if a change of pace, a change of scenery could be best for both parties, and it recirculates the head coaching trade conversation where all of a sudden Mike Tomlin, I think, would be a great fit for the Chicago Bears, would be a great coach for the Bears. It would be someone that we should all want the Bears to have as their head coach. The hard part here is the compensation for that coach when you've got a bunch of different other coaching candidates that you can hire without having to give up draft picks to get them. So we'll kind of look at Mike Tomlin as a coaching candidate here, what the cost might be and how that might shape this discussion. And then I want to wrap up checking in briefly on Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, another name who's entering the Bears head coaching conversation right now. But the Tomlin discussion is interesting to me because you have enough of a split among some people who look at Mike Tomlin and say, well, you know, he hasn't won a playoff game since, 2016, 2017, whatever it is. So therefore, he would be a bad coach for the Chicago Bears. They shouldn't even consider trading for Mike Tomlin. And again, we'll talk about some of the trade compensation stuff here in a minute, but like it's surprising to me that it feels necessary to take some time to be like, no, Mike Tomlin is clearly a very good NFL head coach. And we can debate, okay, should he have won more Super Bowls or whatever, but like he's won a Super Bowl and has never finished a season below 500 as Pittsburgh Steelers head coach. He's had a couple of 8-8 seasons and a little bit more recently, but like never has he had a season finish below 500. Do you know how hard that is to do in the NFL? And not just, anywhere in the NFL, but in the AFC North, where you've had two other MVP candidate quarterbacks on other teams in your division with the Ravens and the Bengals. I mean, sure, the Browns they were only temporarily decent for a little while there, but you still have two perennial Super Bowl contenders in your division every year. And Mike Tomlin still gets his Pittsburgh Steelers teams to win 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 games every single season. He is a proven winning coach with a proven track record of strong culture, leadership, and communication. And I think that's the thing about Mike Tomlin. Because you can't put a numerical number on that, you can't measure that stuff, it's hard for us to value it properly and also like evaluate and compare it properly to other coaches. But I think we don't properly appreciate how much Mike Tomlin does as coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers that gets them to be 10-7 or 11-6 in these seasons, that if a lesser coach would not even get this kind of success with Pittsburgh that he's had. Like people say, oh, he doesn't win enough. And I think of him as a coach who makes his team overachieve, given the talent that he has on his team or lack thereof at some key spots, and also some of the personality he's had to manage. Like those are the two most impressive things to me about Mike Tomlin. His Steelers teams really have not properly replaced Ben Roethlisberger, right? Like they had Big Ben. He's probably a future Hall of Fame quarterback. took them to the Super Bowl a couple times, right? Like, we know how good Ben Roethlisberger was in Pittsburgh, and that was something they were able to be successful for a long time. And yet, even since Ben Roethlisberger started declining, call it, 2017, 18-ish, and was kind of rough for the last couple seasons, and then you had a couple of seasons of Kenny Pickett, and now this Russell Wilson, Justin Fields season, the Steelers really have not had very high-quality quarterback play in the last 5-6 years. And they're still finishing 10-7, 10-7, 9-8, 12-4 in those stretches because of how good of a job Mike Tomlin is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, a lesser coach with the kind of quarterback talent Tomlin has had would not be finishing nearly as good. It's not like he's a coach who's, you just give him an MVP quarterback, and of course he's going to coach the team well. You could point to Sean McDermott with the Buffalo Bills or Zach Taylor with the Bengals, right? Okay, yeah, you give him that quarterback. Of course, they're going to win a lot of games. What's the coach really doing there? Like, Mike Tomlin squeezes more out of what he's had, or really what he hasn't had in Pittsburgh for the last handful of seasons. It was one thing when it was Big Ben every year. It's another thing that he's still doing it, even without having Hall of Fame caliber quarterback play here. And I think most of us outside of Pittsburgh do not fully understand how much coaching and leadership Mike Tomlin has done behind the scenes, so that a number of George Pickens related incidents have not become public. There has been a lot of things that have happened in Pittsburgh behind the scenes in terms of being, late to practice or meetings, or not participating in things, or not following the rules the way that he's supposed to. Not like illegal stuff, but just like team distraction culture stuff with guys like George Pickens, and before that, Antonio Brown. Like, Mike Tomlin has had the leadership and culture skills to manage some of the most difficult individual personalities in the NFL with almost no disruption whatsoever, and very little evidence that there's anything wrong or any real trouble going on behind the scenes. Like, he keeps that all well managed and under wraps in a way that prevents distractions. Like, that's the most valuable part of Mike Tomlin's head coaching tenure that we can't measure, and we don't see it. And so it's hard to properly weigh that when you talk about him and his value as a head coach. I don't know how many head coaches in the NFL currently could manage a locker room the way that Mike Tomlin has in Pittsburgh. There are a lot of stories. If you talk to people who cover the Pittsburgh Steelers, people who have played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, people who have worked for the Pittsburgh Steelers, there are a lot of secrets that are kind of secret but aren't widely known, but are known if you know. If you know about some of the things Mike Tomlin has had to put up with and manage among personalities in the Pittsburgh locker room. That is incredibly impressive. And it's like, that's the sort of like leader of men CEO stuff that we were talking about for Bears when it comes to whether it was going to be Mike Vrabel or Pete Carroll or whatever, Brian Flores. Like, Mike Tomlin has that figured out and is incredibly successful at that. Incredibly successful at winning games. And yes, they've had some tough luck in the playoffs, and maybe he definitely deserves some criticism there, but I think he would be a super, super strong head coaching candidate for the Chicago Bears for all of those reasons. If you could put him on the Bears, he would be the best head coach we've seen in Chicago, certainly since Lovie Smith and maybe since Mike Ditka. Like, that kind of coaching ability. I mean, we didn't even talk about how good his defenses have been and how they've gone through kind of like generations and versions of that defense. They had really good talent when he got there. That talent retired. He replaced them. That talent is kind of getting to retire now, and they're replacing them. Like, he's gone through cycles of players and been great every single time. Like, Mike Tomlin is undoubtedly a great head coach, and it would be a great hire for the Chicago Bears if they could swing it. The problem is, A, the Steelers would have to want to trade him, which we don't know that's the case, but B, trade compensation makes this quite tricky. And if it's going to take, multiple first-round picks or first and second-round picks to get Mike Tomlin, that might not be worth all it's cracked up to be, because you have so many other head coaching options that you like that if you can evaluate coaches at all, you can find a good one without having to give up draft picks either. So we'll kind of look at the trade compensation side of this and where maybe giving up a bunch of picks for Tomlin isn't great. Like, even if you would love to have Mike Tomlin like in a vacuum. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Growing your small business in 2025 comes down to how well you can hire. And let's face it, better hires start with smarter insights. That's where LinkedIn comes in. With the strongest hiring data available, LinkedIn helps you identify the right candidates, giving you the confidence to make the best decisions for your business. I'm a member on LinkedIn. A lot of my friends, family members, and coworkers are all a part of LinkedIn. It's a great community where you're going to have access to the best candidates using data you won't find anywhere else. From unique skills and interests to the connections you share, LinkedIn helps you find the right person for the job. 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high-quality candidates. Hire smarter this year and find your next great hire on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On Bears is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most out of these final few weeks of football action, and that's where PrizePicks comes in. Because if you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on player stats like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds, and with over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are loving PrizePicks. You can look at Jared Goff's passing yards this upcoming week, or Saquon Barkley's touchdowns, whatever it is, or any of your other favorite sports, basketball, hockey, soccer, tennis. They've got it all at PrizePicks. And right now, we've got a special offer for Locked On Bears listeners. If you download the PrizePicks app today and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL, you're going to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. You play your $5, win or lose, you're getting $50 instantly with that promo code LOCKEDONNFL with PrizePicks. Run your game. Mike Tomlin would be a great coach for the Chicago Bears. That I don't doubt. He's not a perfect coach candidate, though. He's got flaws, just like every coach in the NFL has some sort of flaws here. There are some things you can criticize Mike Tomlin for, and that's what makes the trade compensation part tricky. Because if Mike Tomlin has, we'll get into some of the specifics, but, people are pointing to his recent playoff losses. They haven't gotten out of the wild card round in a while, and offensive coordinator choice. We'll get into it, but okay, if Mike Tomlin has his own red flags or whatever, are you going to give up big draft picks for him and his red flag versus when you could sign other available head coaching candidates who may also have red flags but don't have to also cost draft picks? And that's really the challenge here, right? Because when we look back in coach trades, we really have only seen two in the modern era. Like just last year, the Denver Broncos traded for Sean Payton, who has retired, but nonetheless traded for him from the New Orleans Saints, where they gave up a first and second round pick to get Sean Payton to come over. That's basically kind of the rights to Sean Payton because he was otherwise not coaching the New Orleans Saints anymore. That's kind of where, at the very least, the asking price has to start, right? If you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, well, what was the last coach traded for? Okay, let's start there. And then, of course, before that, you had John Gruden traded with the Buccaneers and the Raiders, and that was multiple first and second round picks back in 2002, I think. It was 2 firsts and 2 seconds along with like $8 million cash. Mike Tomlin's a good coach. Mike Tomlin would be a great coach for the Chicago Bears. I'm not sure that it's worth 2 first round picks and 2 second round picks to go get Mike Tomlin. Again, and that's not a reflection of Tomlin not being a good coach, but it's like that adds to the value proposition here, because it's like, okay, would you rather have Mike Tomlin or Ben Johnson 2 firsts and 2 second round picks? It's like, well, wait a minute. Like, even if you could make the argument that Mike Tomlin is a better coaching candidate than any of the guys available on the market. I think he's probably right up there. Like he and Ben Johnson and Pete Carroll would be in the top 3 in some order there for me personally. But like, even if you think Mike Tomlin is the best coach, is he that much better than those other candidates? Like, is he first and second round pick value better of a coach than those other guys who I also think are pretty good coaches? Like, that's where this becomes tricky because it's so much to have to give up for a team that really needs, though. I mean, every team really needs their draft picks, but like for a team that's like still trying to get there, right? Still trying to build up to become a Super Bowl contender. Like it's one thing if you're already a playoff team and you give up these draft picks just to put you over the edge and just to give you that one boost and go all in on, all right, this is the last piece we need to be a Super Bowl winner. Like, but that doesn't necessarily work for a head coach because if you were that close, you probably wouldn't trade for your head coach. But you know what I mean? Like that's where this becomes a challenge because, you know, Ben Johnson's a very good head coaching candidate. I think Pete Carroll's a very good head coaching candidate. Aaron Glenn, very strong head coaching candidates here. Are they so far behind Mike Tomlin that, you got to give up a first and a second round pick to go get Mike Tomlin? Because, you know, again, I don't want to like turn on Mike Tomlin right away, but like you look at Mike Tomlin's record, the last time they won a playoff game was 2016 when they got to the conference championship game. But then since then, they lost in 2017, 2020, 2021, 2023, and 2024. And now, 2024 season, I guess it's 2025 they just lost in. But for the 2024 season, a lot of first-round losses in there and missed the playoffs a few times in between. Obviously, there's an issue here where they're not able to have postseason success. I again contend that this is about the time where the quarterback play started dropping off from Ben Roethlisberger and then was never really properly replaced. And I think the Steelers general manager deserves a little bit more blame than he receives for some of the stuff that's happened there. But also, Tomlin hasn't been great at picking offensive coordinators. He's got Arthur Smith right now. He has, in the past, Todd Haley and Randy Fletcher and Matt Canada was not a good offensive coordinator pick. Like there are some moments there where you look and say like, yeah, Tomlin has flaws, and that's okay. There is no perfect coach, but those flaws weigh heavily when you have to give up a first and second round pick to get him and his flaws, when you could give up no draft picks and get Pete Carroll and his flaws, or Ben Johnson and his flaws. And you would have to say that you would have to be convinced that Mike Tomlin and his flaws are that much better than every other head coaching candidate and their flaws, that it's worth giving up a first and a second round pick. Like I think the feeling there is like Tomlin feels like the most like a guaranteed thing, but I do wonder like how much more of a guaranteed thing is he than say Pete Carroll. We went in depth on Pete Carroll and Mike Vrabel last week on the podcast. Go take a listen to that if you haven't heard that yet, because there's a similar sort of resume here with Pete Carroll, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, towards the end they weren't as successful as he was in the Super Bowl, but his teams were still finishing above 500. His teams were still going to the playoffs. You know, like Pete Carroll is just older, but like compared to Mike Tomlin is definitely the coach I would prefer and is, I would say, the better coach of the two, but not first and second round pick better than Pete Carroll. Like I would rather have Pete Carroll than trade away multiple draft picks to get Mike Tomlin, who's like better than Pete Carroll, but not all those picks better than Pete Carroll. And then of course you got, if you think Ben Johnson can be an even better coach, right? Can not have those same sort of red flags, can get his coordinator hires and be better in the playoffs and still do good enough at the culture leader stuff that you think he's an all around better head coaching candidate, then you really don't want to then give up the draft picks for Mike Tomlin. Like to me, it's sort of like it's a free agency versus a trade thing, right? It's like, it's one thing if you get to free agency and there are no good edge rushers on the market, so you're going to give up a draft pick to trade to go get a guy because you just really have any other options. But right now you have head coaching free agency with some really good free agents out there, so it makes it a lot harder to go out and trade for that guy. Now, okay, maybe if you say Ben Johnson goes to the Raiders and, Pete Carroll goes to the Jaguars and Aaron Glenn goes to the Saints, and all of a sudden you're looking around the head coaching carousel and all the guys you liked are gone. Say Brian Flores goes to the Jets or whatever. I mean, whatever, however you want to do the math here. Say the other 5 head coaching openings all take your top 5 head coaches, and now you're looking around going, okay, Joe Brady, Todd Monken, Cliff Kingsbury. Then all of a sudden, the Mike Tomlin question becomes a lot clearer to me. And at that point, it's like, well, okay, it's either hire a coach I don't believe in or give up draft picks for Mike Tomlin. I'm giving up draft picks for Mike Tomlin at that point. But like, so long as there are, quote unquote, free agent head coaching candidates that I like close enough to Mike Tomlin, that's going to be the smarter move. Like until those candidates are not available for the Bears at that point. Or like, if it was to a point where like, say the Pittsburgh decides, hey, we kind of want to fire Mike Tomlin. So you say, hey, we'll throw you, I don't even know what the number would be, a 3rd round pick, just because you were going to fire him anyway, but we'll throw you a draft pick to take him off your hands for you so that we don't have to compete with everybody else after you fire him. Like, could that, I don't think a scenario like that exists, but that's one where I would totally consider it. Like if it was a more reasonable draft pick than a first and a second round pick or multiple firsts or multiple seconds, like if it was a lesser pick, I'd trade for Tomlin in a heartbeat. It's the high picks there that make this a little bit more difficult. And I don't think the Steelers are just going to outright fire him. That's certainly not right now. So it's tough. I think he would be a great coach. I don't know that this is the right time, place, or fit. And I think the same thing is true for Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. He's the other name that's kind of been entering the cycle here with Notre Dame moving on to the national championship and the Bears expressing interest in Marcus Freeman, but can't interview a coach while he's preparing for a national championship game, right? Like that, there's some challenges with Freeman too, where it's like, I think Marcus Freeman is a great coach. I don't think it's necessarily the right fit for the Chicago Bears right now and not likely to happen, but never say never. We'll go into the Marcus Freeman situation a little bit, kind of corral in the latest Bears coaching carousel news next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. From big upsets to game-winning drives or doinked field goals in if you're the Washington Commanders, the NFL playoffs are just better with FanDuel, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Win or lose on that first $5 bet, it doesn't matter. You place a $5 bet, FanDuel is going to give you $200 in bonus bets, where you can bet on these playoff games. You can bet on college football national championship, the college basketball, NBA, NHL, soccer, tennis, hockey, boxing, you name it. They've got all the sports on the FanDuel app. You can even do live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. There's so many different ways you can play just that one $5 bet, and you're going to get $200 in guaranteed bonus bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So if Mike Tomlin's not on the trade block, probably not likely to be an option for the Bears. The Bears then also interested, though, in another option, Notre Dame's Marcus Freeman, a name who initially popped up like during the regular season that he could be a dark horse name for this Bears job. Then it went pretty silent for a while, but Notre Dame beats Texas. I didn't watch the Notre Dame game. I don't remember who they beat. Notre Dame wins their game over the weekend to advance to the college football national championship. I know they're playing Ohio State. I just can't for the life of me remember who they just beat. Penn State. They beat Penn State on Thursday. Thank you. They beat Penn State on Thursday to advance to the national championship game. And wow, okay. National championship caliber college head coach. Bears didn't take Jim Harbaugh last year after he won the national championship, but could they take Marcus Freeman? Obviously, some logistical challenges to start. He's not going to want to do an interview in the week that he's getting ready for the national championship game next week. Like, that's kind of more important stuff going on there. But like, if you think about it, like Marcus Freeman, super successful coach, has been winning every season since he took over at Notre Dame. Great leadership over there, big culture guy. The locker room absolutely loves him. I mean, that's why they hired him for that job when, Brian Kelly left and the locker room rallied around Marcus Freeman and said, we want this guy to be our coach. And they said, all right, go for it. And he kind of just had to pick up where Brian Kelly left off, and kind of had to instill, there was already sort of a Brian Kelly culture there, but he had to kind of make it his own. Like, that's not an easy situation for him to come in and command the room and dominate the way he has at Notre Dame, especially like when you look year after year. I mean, college football landscape is crazy now with NIL, where players are constantly, transferring out and everything. But like, Notre Dame has had a lot of turnover on its coaching staff too. Like they've changed up. They've lost offensive coordinators like each of the last 2 or 3 seasons. They get hired away to go to other jobs, has to find a new offensive coordinator, bring him in, and they've still been able to be very successful on offense. And of course, his defenses are always great. He's a defensive coach in his background through and through. Like and he's a young guy. He I think connects really well with players. Like, there's a lot to like about Marcus Freeman and makes him a strong potential head coaching candidate here. But I think this one's interesting because, I mean, a lot of Bears fans are Notre Dame fans. So I think even if you're not a Notre Dame fan, you might know enough Notre Dame fans who are have always been kind of eternally frustrated with Notre Dame, even in the last couple of seasons. Like, this is like one of the greatest seasons in modern Notre Dame history. But prior to the season, they've been winning, 10 plus games a year, but there's always like a couple of stinkers in there, games that they lost that you really felt like they shouldn't have, and maybe failing to play well in some of the bigger moments in some of those regular season games in previous years. Not to say that, he was bad by any means, but there's been some lingering frustration around Notre Dame. It's not as though Marcus Freeman and the Notre Dame football team have been perfect and free of criticism and have had no frustrations from their fan base. Like, he is not a perfect head coach candidate, but I think he has as strong of a resume as anybody. But one of the things that concerns me a little bit about grabbing somebody like Marcus Freeman, and you could put Matt Campbell from Iowa State in the same conversation since the Bears evidently are going to interview him as well. When a guy like that is jumping from college to the NFL without ever having coached in the NFL, there's a lot of unknowns there. It's not to say he can't do it, but the game is a little bit different. The style of play is a little bit different. The athletes are bigger, faster, stronger, and certainly, connecting with college kids versus professional adults is a different style of coaching. You coach college kids a little bit differently than NFL players, and like Marcus Freeman is younger than Mercedes Lewis. If the Bears hired him, he would have at least a player on his team who is older than him, which is interesting. He's 39. He's not like young, but he's a younger coach. Like there's aspects of that where it's like we would want to see how well he's able to connect that way. That's not as huge of a concern for me. But the bigger one here is like building out an NFL coaching staff. Who is Marcus Freeman going to bring in as offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach? Are those all going to be college guys as well? Like he doesn't have the experience, both in terms of years, but also in terms of, the breadth and being in the NFL to like have the connections around the NFL to build a staff with NFL experience. It doesn't mean he can't build a good staff. He's built a good staff at Notre Dame, but he had spent all his time in college football. He had been at the defensive coordinator at Cincinnati and had bounced around a little bit. Like he knew some guys around college football, so that when he has a coordinator hired away, he's got that Rolodex of people he's worked with and people he knows, people he trusts that he can hire over to be their coach. He doesn't have as much of that in the NFL. I'm sure he's got connections to some NFL coaches. Like it's not like he doesn't know anybody, but does he know enough people to be able to build out a robust staff? Because it's one thing for Marcus Freeman to adjust from coaching college kids to the NFL, but if you have an entire staff of guys who mostly coach college football, then everyone's trying to adjust all at the same time. Like you want him to have experienced coaches on the staff that can help him through first-time stuff. He's never had to deal with some of this stuff at the NFL level. It'd be nice to have, let's say a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator who has a bunch of NFL experience, who's been through it before, maybe a former head coach or something that can, kind of give him, that he can lean on and go to for advice and say, hey, what is, in your experience, what do we do in these kind of situations? How do we handle this or that? That's just different than what you had at the college level. And it's not to say that he can't do it or that he can't figure out how to do it. It's a legitimate question mark. And that's something that he has to answer for in interviews and give a good response and be prepared to handle. And maybe he's got that all figured out and it's good to go. It's just something that us on the outside don't know. And it's a real valid concern jumping from college football to the NFL that way. Like it's different when Jim Harbaugh wins a championship at Michigan, goes back to the NFL and has a bunch of NFL coaches he can go to for his staff. He reunites with Greg Roman, who had been his offensive coordinator in San Francisco and had been coaching in the NFL for a while, even while Jim was at Michigan. Like he put a bunch of NFL coaches on that staff. He brought some Michigan guys with him too, but he had previous NFL experience, so he knew what he was doing in the NFL. He had NFL connections to build out a good coaching staff. Like that's a much easier ask to take former NFL guy from college and bring him back. Same with like when Pete Carroll went back from USC back to Seattle. Like that's an easier jump than guy who goes only college football to the NFL. Like, there aren't very many of those. We don't have any in the NFL right now that were hired away from being a college head coach besides Jim Harbaugh. So it's just not something that we see the jump made a lot. And if Marcus Freeman is the right coach, then he's definitely then going to be more than capable of handling all that. But that's one of the things you're trying to evaluate in who's going to be the right coach for this hire. And is that more risky than Ben Johnson? Is that more risky than Pete Carroll, than Brian Flores? I mean, each one has their own sets of strengths and weaknesses, right? Like Marcus Freeman might be a better coach, better leader, but has those concerns there. Whereas like Pete Carroll might have all the experience stuff, but has the age thing. And Ben Johnson has the offense and that's all great, but we don't know how good of a head coach he'll be. Like each candidate has a thing that you can really like about him, and then some very real question marks that are going to need to be answered during that interview process. And, well, with Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn and Marcus Freeman, you're going to have to wait for more interviews there because Marcus Freeman's still coaching football. Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, they're still coaching football, and I guess Brian Flores is too. Everyone's still in the playoffs. You got to wait for. So we've got plenty of time for this Bears head coaching search to keep playing out, and we'll keep breaking down any and all new updates we get for you right here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That's your team every day. If you're looking for a second listen, check out our Locked On NFL podcast that covers the NFL from the league-wide perspective. All the biggest stories. Comes out twice a day. 2 shows a day. Once in the morning with Tyler Rowland, and then in the barbershop with Tony Wiggins in the afternoon for more NFL talk. Coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.